Thanks for listening to the ArtTactic podcast. I'm your host, Adam Green. This year on the podcast, we focused on including more artists, not necessarily to speak about their work, but rather their experiences navigating the opaque art world. If you're an artist, regardless of what stage you are in your career, you can always learn from hearing about the experiences of other artists. We don't hear about it enough. And for collectors or those who work in the industry, I think it's important to further understand how artists are viewing the many facets of the art world and how they're trying to manage their careers. So in this week's episode of the podcast, we chat with the artist Amir Fallah about his journey as an artist from school to where he is today, having successful gallery exhibitions as well as museum shows. We hope you enjoy the episode. Thanks so much for listening. Amir, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We're excited to have you on. So the origin of this podcast episode really is you reaching out to me offline and expressing that you felt it was really important to have more artists as guests on the podcast, that it was important to hear from artists about their experiences navigating the art world, really something that isn't discussed enough. And so then I said, hey, why don't you come on the podcast? And you said, okay, and here we are. So to start things off, tell us what prompted you exactly to want to reach out, and why do you think it's so important for artists to come on these types of forums to talk about the art market and the art world and their experiences?
Well, first and foremost, I'm a huge podcast lover. So I listen to all types of podcasts, and specifically art ones. And a lot of times what I find when I listen to podcasts with artists is, they get into the artist's childhood, how they grew up, but they don't really get into what it's like to be an artist and how do you navigate being an artist at all the different levels, from emerging to, mid-career all the way to, the highest levels. And I think it just comes from a very selfish place of where, as my career is changing and developing, there's a lot of times where I wish that I had access to artists that are a bit higher up than me and hear, how they navigated kind of the murky waters of the art world. And so it's simply just a selfish reason where I wanted to hear artists talking about what happens when their prices quadruple overnight, or when they go from a small gallery to a big gallery, and how they navigate these different levels of being an artist.
Well, we're happy you're here, and we're going to have more artists on in the future. So I imagine most of our listeners are familiar with you and your work, but before we start jumping into some of these art world topics, I do think it would be helpful if you could just briefly, we don't need to go into your childhood as you joked, but tell us about your trajectory as an artist. When did you graduate school? Who are the galleries you're showing with? Just to give that context so we fully understand your perspective as an artist.
Sure. So I went to undergrad at a school in Baltimore called the Maryland Institute College of Art, or MICA. And I studied painting and drawing there. And immediately from undergrad, I went to grad school at UCLA, where I also studied painting and drawing. And I graduated from UCLA in 2005, and I've been in LA ever since. And just started very organically doing lots of little group shows here and there, and kind of working my way up to, having solo shows. And currently I'm represented by Shulamit Nazarian Gallery in LA, Denny Dimon Gallery in New York and Hong Kong, the Third Line in Dubai, and Dia Horia in Greece.
And so when we think about artists nowadays, there really is a lot more to it than just making art. You have to consider so many things, such as how much art to make, how it should be priced, what galleries are the best partners for you, how do you market yourself to the public. Generally speaking, how do you approach some of these things, and are there certain guiding principles you follow when it comes to the art world?
For as long as I can remember, the one constant that I heard from artists that were older than me was to go slow and steady. And, I had the opportunity to watch a lot of my friends in grad school have immediate success while they were still in school. Many of them had, were exhibiting internationally, multiple gallery representations, in their early 20s and selling at the highest levels. And some of them are still very successful artists, but a good handful of them also, didn't survive, multiple recessions. They overproduced or underproduced, or their egos got ahead of them, and it just didn't work out. And that didn't happen for me because I really didn't have many opportunities right out of grad school. I was very young when I graduated, and I had, fortunately or unfortunately, I had many years of solitude in the studio where I just kind of chipped away at the work without many people paying attention to me. So it took me a solid, 10, 11 years to really get a footing in the art world after grad school. And so because of that, I've just realized that, the faster you shoot out, the more likely you are to burn out. So everything from pricing to where my work is placed, I try to take a more conservative and more methodical approach. I like to be very involved in who my work gets sold to. I'm very involved with my galleries. And I just like to have a hand in as much of my own career as possible. I don't like the idea of handing the keys to a gallerist and, just hiding out of my studio. And so far that's served me well. And, my career has just been escalating at a very nice, slow, but, even pace year after year. And, it feels like the safest approach for me.
Yeah, that resonates a lot with me. I feel like, honestly, that's the best formula to follow. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And when I speak with younger artists, I share that same philosophy with them. You mentioned that your career was slowly developing. I think it's interesting to think about that at this moment now. Really, since the first few months of COVID, the art market has been booming, and that's especially been the case for very emerging artists. Their work can be seen and discovered so easily now on Instagram that artists' careers are taking off left and right at such a young age, just out of school or even while still in school. Given all of this, I think for young artists or new collectors, honestly, the idea of an artist's career slowly developing might seem like a foreign concept. So tell us a little bit more about that time in your career when you were younger and weren't getting nearly as much attention as you are today. I think that was during maybe the early part of what later became the zombie formalist movement. But how did you push through and persevere when you were experiencing this adversity and very little attention?
When I was making, I guess you could call it semi-abstract work. It certainly wasn't figurative or representational when zombie formalism kind of began. And right when that trend began, for whatever reason, I decided I'm going to go into figurative representation. So when I started doing figurative work, it was the absolute worst timing ever. Nobody was making work like that. Only a handful of my friends. And from a business standpoint, it was the absolute wrong move. But from an artistic standpoint, it was where my interests were, and it was where I felt like I could really contribute something to art. And so that resulted in another like 5 years of small bits of success here and there, but multiple solo shows where things didn't sell. And but I was very excited about the work, and I felt like I always had this mindset that I would talk myself into the idea that it wasn't the work, it was everyone else. And it just took the right person to see it and kind of connect with the work. And, it's a little bit of a foolish mindset, but I think for artists, that kind of stubbornness and conviction is what kind of keeps you going, where when you're making, almost minimum wage with a master's degree, and you've been at your career for 10 years. And it was just piece by piece, one little bit of success or one opportunity. And every time I got presented an opportunity, I would try to maximize on that opportunity. So, and I'm not even speaking commercially. Like, for instance, I got offered to do a solo show at the Nerman Museum in Overland, Kansas. And they had a great director, Bruce Hartman. And, Bruce gave me my first shot at doing a museum show. And I didn't have that much time to put the work together, but, I'd like to think that I went all out. I mean, we did like a fully immersive installation, and I really gave that show 100%. And that show was one of the defining moments where things started falling into place, and collectors started buying the work. The museum collected a piece from the show. I got great reviews, and, it kind of helped me make that take one more step forward. So every time I got an opportunity, even when it wasn't a big one, I would really put all my energy into it. And I would pretend that it was a retrospective at the Guggenheim, even if it was at a nonprofit space or an artist run gallery. And I found that kind of enthusiasm for making the work and exhibiting the work has kind of served me well.
Well, I love hearing your approach to exactly how you embraced each opportunity. And even if a specific opportunity wasn't the Guggenheim retrospective, I think what we can learn from your experiences is that each specific opportunity really isn't isolated from other future opportunities, because each opportunity, it sounds like, led to more momentum and more success, more sales, better gallery representation, more museum support. And it sounds like maybe the slow start of your career may have put a chip on your shoulder, or at the very least motivated you to work especially hard to take advantage of these types of opportunities. And something else that I think maybe helped shape this approach is that you actually owned a business while you were starting your art career. I didn't know that originally, but as we've chatted over the years, you told me a little bit about it. So tell us a little bit more about what that business actually was, and were you able to learn certain skill sets from being a business owner that you could actually apply to help manage your art career more effectively? Probably some skills that, frankly, aren't taught in art school.
Yeah, I started a magazine called Beautiful Decay. It began as a black and white zine that I did in high school, and then when I was in college, I restarted it, and it wasn't intended to be a real business. It was just like an art school project. But the timing was right. This is pre-blogs, pre-WordPress, pre-Instagram, and we were like the analog Instagram of our day, and we covered art and design and fashion, kind of the merging of all these different creative fields. And me and my partners, we made every mistake possible because we were like in our early 20s doing that. But from every mistake, I learned a lot of valuable lessons. But I also learned how to just be professional, like meeting a deadline, delivering on your promises, just very basic things, basic accounting, the basics of marketing and presenting yourself. And I feel like those are all lessons that again, have come into play, as, my art career kind of took off a bit, and, I started working with multiple galleries. And, one of the things a lot of my galleries tell me is that, it's fairly straightforward working with me. They give me a deadline, I meet it. If I tell them I'm giving them 5 paintings, I give them 5 paintings. And, I'm sure it drives them a bit crazy, since I'm very hands-on and want to be part of every step of the way. But I also think that brings a certain value to the gallery program as well, because the galleries also feel like I'm a partner in their program, not just my own work, but the other artists in the program's work. So, it's a nice way of working. It's how I would, like to work with any gallery that I work with. Most of my dealers I'm friends with. We we hang out. We talk about our personal lives, and it really does feel more like a marriage than casually dating. And most of my galleries I've been with for many, many years. The oldest, my gallery in the third line, I've been showing with them. I've lost count, but since like 2005, 2006. So, I don't like to date a lot of galleries. I like to have really long-term relationships where we can, grow together.
Well, in the podcast, we have a lot of listeners who are artists. Some are younger and don't have any gallery representation yet, and some maybe are with their first galleries. But we also have plenty of listeners who work at galleries. So I think it would be really valuable to hear your further insights, and maybe even if you could share some advice on what you look for in a gallery relationship and what traits are most important to you.
Well, I mean, as far as galleries go, you want to work with someone that really believes in your work. You don't want to be represented by a gallery who thinks you're doing well right now and they're trying to cash in on your success. You want somebody that wants to take your success and develop and then take it to the next level. And you're looking for a long-term partnership. I mean, I know a lot of artist friends, they're very casual about who they show with, and it almost never works out when they just like jump at some opportunity where they can make a nice amount of money short term, but the work, it has like long-term consequences. So I would say to just take it really slow, and sometimes it's better not to be in a relationship that's not that you don't feel 100% about, and it's better to wait. I mean, in Los Angeles, I didn't have representation until just recently. I waited 11 years to have a gallery that represented me, and I had some options, but I always felt that either they couldn't do anything for me that I couldn't already do for myself, or that they just wanted to take a flyer and just see what happens with my work, and they weren't really invested long term in my career. So I really waited for many years until Shulamit Nazarian came around, and I could see some sort of long-term roadmap to, and also our ambitions and ideals in the business aligned. They want long-term sustainable growth, and they really want to support their artists at a very high level. And that was the type of relationship that I was looking for. I wanted a gallery to be partner with, and not just be a showroom for my work every couple of years when it was my turn to have a solo show.
And so now that you've had this level of success with museum exhibitions, and commercially your works reach a certain price level and the work sells very quickly at that price point, do you feel like you've reached a new stage of your career? And what career goals do you have for yourself at this time?
Yeah, I think what's really most important thing for me is the work is selling. There's collectors that are interested. That's not an issue. So now that, money isn't at the forefront of my mind, I'm thinking about where the work is going. Is it, my absolute number one priority is to show with museums and or nonprofit institutions. And, I feel like I have something to say with my work. I want to contribute to the canon of art history, and I want to work with people who are interested in helping my work, reach the highest levels. Like, I'm not interested in, pumping my prices at auction and just making a quick buck and then, checking out of the art world. I want to be here in 50 years, and I want to place my work in situations where that can happen. So even with like collectors, I'm fortunate that I'm actually friends with most of the people that collect my work. By and large, I know most of my collectors. I hang out with them. In some cases, I vacation with them. We're friends. And it's really gratifying when you have those types of relationships, because you feel like they're on your team, and they get to kind of follow you along on your journey, and they get to also grow with you, and you get to grow with them. And it's a mutually beneficial situation, outside of just, monetary gains. And I found that the collectors I really believed in my work early on, they continue to collect the work in depth, which is really gratifying too, because then they have this mini retrospective of your work, through the years. And long term, hopefully that also equals to the work having some sort of like monetary value. But I think there's a lot of things to be gained outside of just a big paycheck at the end. I think most artists want that, and collectors that are in it for the long haul, they realize that the cultural capital is a lot more fulfilling than the monetary capital.
Definitely. And you mentioned you have close relationships with a lot of collectors who collect your work. Honestly, I don't think that's incredibly common. I mean, I know it happens sometimes, but there are plenty of instances when there's no dialogue at all between artist and collector, which I think is a shame. And I imagine Instagram has helped you develop and maintain a lot of these relationships. It's honestly really incredible tool if you want to use it in that way and take advantage of it. I think you're pretty accessible on it, responding to DMs, commenting on other posts. And I do think having those kinds of relationships with collectors just makes collecting your work an even more exciting and rewarding experience for collectors, and probably for you as well. I'm curious for you, are these relationships happening organically, or are you thinking about the benefits of having these kinds of dialogues and relationships, and you're consciously trying to do this?
I mean, I love art, and I love the art world, and I love all the different players that are in the art world. Like, I'm a full believer in the power of art in the art community. And so, when people don't buy art by accident, it's a very conscious decision. And it takes, to be a good collector, it takes so many hours. And so I find those people interesting. I find people that research, they travel, their entire life is consumed by art. They're my people. So for me, it just feels natural to want to engage with them and spend time with them and learn, why are they collecting this stuff? They could fill their houses up with whatever they want, but why are they collecting art, by artists that are making art today? Many of these people can collect, works by dead artists or blue chip artists that, where there's zero risk in the price going down, but they're choosing to buy contemporary artists. And I find that really fascinating. So I genuinely enjoy getting to know them. And I find a lot of times we're talking about other artists' works. I'm showing them artists who I'm excited by. They're showing me artists that they're excited by. And for me, it's no different than talking to a fellow artist or a gallerist or a curator. If the collector is a serious collector, then, we just have really great relationships. So, I mean, I'm interested in those kinds of relationships because there's a genuine connection, but then it helps everything. It helps business. It helps your personal life. It's more fulfilling and enjoyable. I guess it's a more like holistic view of the art world. Like, I don't like to be cynical and think that every collector is a flipper and they don't care about art. I think they do care about art and they love art. So why not seek out collectors that you do feel aligned with and you do have something in common with?
A big part of the art market is the auctions. You've had a few paintings come to auction, but these have been older works, and your work has evolved so much. It just isn't the same thing as a more recent work coming to auction that's closer aesthetically to what you're doing currently. But as an artist at this point in your career, how much are auctions on your mind when you're thinking about the art market, and how do you manage some of these emotions that come along with that?
Well, it's completely out of my hands to a certain level, right? People sell work for many different reasons. The most recent work that went up for auction, the collector had it since 2007. So, even with the very early work, people have held on to it for decades, which I like to take as a compliment. I mean, I feel like most people that collect my work actually live with it. They send me pictures of the work in their home, and they actually have some sort of connection with the work outside of like them thinking it's valuable or thinking that the price is going to go up. But I do see the writing on the wall, and it does feel like sooner or later my works are going to pop up to auction. And you know, uh, I think every artist is simultaneously scared of that moment, but also maybe a little bit excited by the potential of it, because it can have effects on your career. I mean, um, it's no secret that when an artist's work does well at auction, all of a sudden all the big galleries come sniffing around. Um, but it's a double-edged sword. So I try not to think too much about it, um, because I don't have any control over what goes to auction. But I think what I do have control over is who my work sells to, and making sure that the work goes in the best possible hands, so that the work doesn't go into somebody's hands who needs to make a $20,000 or $30,000 profit. They want to, and they can afford to hold the work. So it just goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, having good relationships with collectors, not saying yes to every sale, even if it could be a lot of money, and and having good relationships with your galleries, and making sure that they know that you want the work to go into the best hands. Not, sometimes you have to hold on to a big painting for 6 months to a year until it goes into the right person's hand. Maybe you could have sold that painting immediately, but it would have gone into some speculator's hands, and it'll show up at auction. So we've been doing that a lot too, which is just making sure that the right painting goes into the right person's hand and just doesn't go into the first person that calls up the gallery.
And finally, while we have you here, we do have a lot of young emerging artists who listen to the podcast, and I'm sure they'd love to hear any final advice you can offer on navigating the art world. What words of wisdom do you generally share specifically for rising artists who reach out to you?
Well, in many ways, I'm still trying to figure that out myself. So I don't pretend to know everything, but in the little bit that I do know, I think for me, what made the difference was I needed many years of just working in solitude and really figuring out what I wanted to say with the work. It wasn't just about, I was cranking out a lot of work, but I didn't know what I wanted to contribute to art. I didn't know what my angle was, or what my little contribution or tweak to, the canon of art history was. And that just takes a lot of time and energy. And sometimes that might mean that you have to wait, you don't start showing and, making a bunch of money off your art in your like early 20s. Maybe it means that it doesn't happen for you until your mid 30s, but you have to make sure the work is ready for prime time, because the worst thing that can happen is you have some success when the work is still half baked, and then that work is out there and it's out of your control, and it could show up at auction. People can dump it. They can try to return it to the gallery, and you have no control over that. So the only thing you do have control over is making really good work that, hopefully can stand the test of time, or at least you're attempting to make some work, that you think can stand the test of time. So just being really patient and just being really mindful with who you align yourself with, because in the art world, just like everywhere else, there's a lot of well-intentioned people, and then there's like a lot of sharks that, will do anything to make $1 off of you, and new artists pop up every day. So we're very disposable. So, if it's not working with you, they'll just find another painter or sculptor or photographer. There's no shortage of artists. So you can't kid yourself and think that you're so special that, you can work with someone that has a bad reputation, or isn't the most respected person, and you can somehow come out, on top. It rarely happens.
Amir, thanks so much again for coming onto the podcast. We really enjoyed the conversation and hearing you reflect on all of your experiences in the art world. It was really insightful. And before we let you go, tell us about your show that's open now, as well as what you have planned for the near future.
Well, I have a solo show that's currently up right now in Hong Kong with Denny Dimon Gallery. And that'll be running till June 4th. And at the end of June, on the 30th, I have a solo show with the Sika Foundation, which is a new nonprofit space in Vancouver. And I'll have a show there for about a month and a half.
Perfect. Well, we're looking forward to following along. Thanks so much again, Amir.
Awesome, man.